Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello and welcome to our third episode of our series Islamic Finance with Sheikh Shady Al-Suleiman from Sydney, Australia, researcher in the field of Islamic economics. Sheikh Shady, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Dear viewers, we talked with Sheikh Shady in the previous episodes about the concept of Islamic economics. We also talked about the components of financial transactions in Islam and some of the important ethical and moral values. We will be talking in the upcoming episodes, inshallah, about specific important issues like Islamic banking. In a world where Islamic banking has proved to be more solid than the traditional Western unrestricted free market banking world with all its virtual components and the leverage and the risk involved that led to the almost meltdown of the financial system. We're seeing the world today trying to regulate in a way that is really in a way compliant with some of the basic Shari'ah laws. We'll also be talking about many other important issues in our modern world concerning economics, like the view of Islam on monopoly, on a mortgage, on insurance, and much more. But in this episode, we will be talking about the principles we derive Islam's opinion from and Islam's view and Islam's judgment on the world of economy and the contemporary issues. And Sheikh Shady, could you introduce us and give us the basic guideline to the principles, indeed, of Shari'ah in this field?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah. Obviously that we know that our major principles, our main sources, masadir in the Shari'ah for the Islamic law is the Quran, then the Sunnah. We refer to it as the Quran and the Sunnah. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, I had left two things amongst you, if you grab onto them, you will never ever go astray or misguided. And then the Prophet alayhi wasallam said, Kitabullah, the book of Allah, and my Sunnah, which is the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The scholars are in consensus that our main two sources is the Quran, then the Sunnah. Even based on Bab al-Buyu' or Bab al-Mu'amalat, based on the chapters of transaction or trade. With Bab al-Buyu', with the chapter and with the trades and transaction, it is a lot more vast and a lot more wide than when it comes to worships. The Islamic ruling says that when it comes to the worships, we are restricted to what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said and did. So we cannot innovate or put in a form of ijtihad.
It will be a bid'ah.
Yes, it will become an innovation when it comes to the worships. So the worships, as the scholars say, al-asl fil ibadat al-tawqif, that the principle when it comes to the worships, it is stopped in accordance to what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said and did and approved of. So we cannot come up with a new form of worship unless the Prophet ﷺ did it. So any form of worship is haram unless the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did that. When it comes to the transactions, when it comes to trades, it's the opposite. Every form of trade is halal unless the Shari'ah made it haram. So every form of trade is halal unless the Shari'ah had prohibited and unless the Shari'ah had forbidden. And this is where we say al-aslu fil ashya al-ibaha, that originally everything is permissible until the Shari'ah says this is haram. So this is the qa'idah, this is the principle that even the trades and the buying and the selling and the transaction and Islamic economy or and Islamic finance is based on. Is based on that all types of transaction, all types of dealings, all types of trades are permissible until the Sharia says, or until what the Sharia had mentioned, that this is forbidden or this is not acceptable. And this is where we find the ahadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam based on that. It's a lot more from the ahadith than what you find in the Quran al-Kareem. The Quran gives you just general principles, where the ahadith come and elaborate more on that, or the hadith come and interpret what those verses mention. That's one point. The other point is that the bab or the door of ijtihad, personal reasoning, the door of putting a personal effort is a lot more opened in the chapters of trade than what it is open in any other chapter.
Right, and that was indeed my next question. It was in today's world, there are so many new derivatives, so many new ways of financial or monetary or trade dealings that probably it was not mentioned in specific in a hadith as a haram form, for instance. So what should we do with these very new things that were not there, not 1400 years ago, but they were not there 20 years ago? And every day there's something new.
Yes, we are living in a world that there's always a new product.
Indeed.
When it comes to dealing and transactions, especially with the small world village, as they say. This whole world is becoming one little village.
It is.
Where you could communicate with one person from the other side of the world within minutes.
Where you can make a financial transaction
within seconds.
Yes, within seconds.
So we are becoming this global village, as they say. And because we are interacting and we are integrating with different cultures, different ways of life, so there are these new forms and new products. That's why the scholars always say that the door of ijtihad, the door of personal reasoning, is a lot more opened in a chapter or in the subject or the field of trade than it is open in any other field or in other chapter. So you find that the ijtihad is very restricted when it comes to ibadat, very limited when it comes to other matters such as marriage and so on. But the most widest and the most vastest chapter and field that you find is a lot of ijtihad in, and the ijtihad is still open to the Day of Judgment. On that is when it comes to Islamic finance and
there is a consensus on that the door has to remain open.
Consensus, I would not say consensus because there are some scholars, which is a very minority number, who close the door of ijtihad, which most of the scholars
even in trade.
Yeah, even in trade, but that's to think about that's impossible. And that's why when you live in the West, or maybe when you interact with other cultures, you become a lot more open in the way you think and look at things. Like Imam Shafi'i had one madhab when he was in Iraq, but when he came to Egypt, he changed his madhab. So when you start dealing with others, you realize that there's a lot more to be spoken about, and there's a lot more regulations to be regulated, and there's a lot more rulings need to be dealt with.
Right. Again, on the ijtihad, do we have, in this specific field, trade and economy and finance, do we have enough Muslim scholars that are specialized in this field that do the ijtihad for the rest of the ummah?
No. At the beginning of the 21st century, when the globalization took place, and all the different types of the world and people start to interact with one another, obviously the scholars start to be more open to those matters, where before that they were just more traditional, a lot more traditional. Like every culture, every city had their way of buying and selling. But now, at this time and era, the scholars are forced now to look into those matters. Before, they didn't look into those matters because there was no need to look into those matters. Those matters did not come up. May Allah have mercy on Imam Malik. When people used to come and ask him a question, he used to ask, did it happen? And if they say, no, it didn't happen, Imam Malik will say, when it happens, come and talk to me. So because these matters weren't a subject of discussion or a subject of a question amongst the people, the scholars didn't look into them. But right now, you find a lot of scholars who are specialized in that field. And a lot of scholars are looking into that field, such as one of the pioneer countries, Muslim countries, in the Islamic finance these days is Malaysia. Malaysia is doing a great work amongst them and amongst their scholars, and with the support and the help of the government when it comes to Islamic finance. And they are exporting the experience to a lot of the Western countries.
Right. Of course, the information technology and the electronic technology as well, if we can say so, has made a revolution in the field of trade and finance. But again, since this is such a crucial issue, and you'd find that most of the questions and the minds of Muslims is whether their money is halal or not. So, and you find in today's world that maybe the world itself needs Islamic theories in the world of economy to support it in its crisis. So again, is there enough care on this direction from the part of scholars, or do you think there is more to be done?
No doubt there's got to be more to be done. And more for the Islamic scholars or the Muslim scholars to get out there and experience, because most of the Muslim scholars are very traditional and they're very cultural and still live in their closed villages or closed cities. But when you go out there, especially when you start dealing with the West and you start seeing what's the West and how the West deals with those matters, that's when you start realizing the importance of those issues. Like, for example, I come from Australia. When it comes to Islamic finance, we are in a huge demand of getting a ruling on certain issues that Muslims, such as in Egypt or in other countries, don't need, because we have a different way of life there, different economical system, that we need an Islamic ruling on it. So, and that's where you find most of the Western countries and the Muslims who live in the West need those rulings and need the scholars to speak about them. And you realize these days Islamic finance is taking its place amongst the Muslim scholars and amongst the West.
Yes.
You know, I come from a country where Islamic finance now is becoming one of the major topics in the parliament and in the economical world.
Indeed, same happened in France. The UK and the US is also increasing its exposure to Islamic banking and other parts in the world. Now, just before the break, again on the issue of principles. It's Quran, then Sunnah, and the door is still open for ijtihad.
We were saying that the Quran and Sunnah are the main two principles. Then we know that the scholars have after that the ijma', which is the scholarly consensus, and then you've got the qiyas, which is analogy. But ijma' and qiyas, which we could say mainly qiyas, is based on ijtihad. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu to Yemen, he asked him, he said, "Oh Mu'adh, if a matter arises in front of you, with what are you going to deal with it? How are you going to deal with it?" So he said, "I'm going to look into the book of Allah." So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, this is from his wisdom alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, "How about if you do not find that matter mentioned in the book of Allah, what are you going to do?" So he said, "I'm going to look into the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam." So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, again from his wisdom, if he said, "And if you do not find it in the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what are you going to do?" He said, "Ashtahidu ra'yi wa la alu." He said, "I'm going to put the effort and put the personal reasoning to try and come up with the best resolution or the best verdict or the best ruling without going any or without ever exaggerating or transgressing." So what did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? He said, "Alhamdulillah, alladhi waffaqa Rasulillah lima yuhibbu aw lima yardahu Allah wa rasuluh." I thank Allah, the one that had guided the messenger of Allah to what pleases and to what makes Allah and His messenger love. So this is our way of dealing with these things.
Akbar. Sheikh, dear viewers, will be taking a short break here and come back for the second part of Islamic finance in a short while. Assalamu alaikum.
The spirit of Hajj. Join Sheikh Ma'in Kusa as he speaks about the true essence of Hajj, its meaning, and the wisdom behind its rituals.
Hajj, brothers and sisters, has great virtues which have been narrated to us by our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whoever performs Hajj for the sake of Allah and therein utters no evil nor commits any evil act would return from his Hajj as the day his mother gives birth to him. That is, he would return pure from sins as if he was just born. The Eid is even a larger gathering of Muslims in the same town.
All of these and more in the spirit of Hajj.
Huda, a light in every home.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello and welcome to the second part of this episode on the principles that guide Islam's role on the world of economics with Sheikh Shady Al-Suleiman. Sheikh Shady, what can we say more about the principles of our religion?
Yes, we're saying that our masadr, our sources that we derive our Islamic rulings from are from the Quran and from the Sunnah. Then we get to the consensus of the scholars, ijma', and then we get the analogy, which is qiyas. Now obviously not everything that the Quran and the Sunnah or even the scholars in the past have spoken about, especially with the current matters that we are facing. So the door of ijtihad is still there. The door of personal reasoning, or for a scholar to put the effort to try and come up with the best ruling that suits every time and era and every place, it's still open. Now this is all based on the Islamic rulings, on Islamic principles. We need to always reflect back to what the Quran mentions. We need to always reflect back to what the Sunnah had mentioned, and we need to reflect back to what the scholars had agreed on. And that reflection is mainly what we refer to as analogy or qiyas. Now there's 5 values. There are 5 main values that the Shari'ah and the scholars had agreed that the Shari'ah protects. And it is the responsibility of every Muslim, and it is the responsibility of the public and the responsibility of the state to protect. The first thing is the deen. The deen is number one, that must be protected, and it is the responsibility of every individual to protect the deen, and the responsibility of the public and the responsibility of the state. And then the scholars have the other 4 after him, which they call the nafs, your soul. The soul of every person must be protected. Okay, and we're talking about Muslim and also non-Muslims in certain conditions that the Sharia lays down and puts. And then you've got your offsprings and honor. Your offsprings and honor must be protected. These are very important values in Islam. Then your wealth and your intellect. The intellect must be protected, and your wealth. Now some scholars put them in different orders and so on, but one of the major things, or one of those 5 values that the Sharia wants the Muslim to protect, wants the public to protect, and wants the state to protect, is the money, wealth. And when we say wealth, it's a lot more vaster than when we say money. Okay, when we say wealth, we are talking about anything that has an Islamic value. We're talking about money, we're talking about commodity, we're talking about properties, we're talking about cattle, we're talking about anything that has an Islamic value. It is the responsibility of every Muslim individual, and it's the responsibility of the public and the responsibility of the state to protect that. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Kull al-Muslimi ala al-Muslimi haram." Everything from a Muslim is haram on other Muslim. And what did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? "Damuhu wa maluhu wa irduh." His blood, his wealth, and his honor. So the wealth is something protected, must be protected, and the Sharia puts all the necessary means to protect wealth, to protect any kind of wealth. And the Quran and the Sunnah reflect on that in many verses. That's why we need to always, the scholars always put that as a priority, and to look at the personal interest and the public interest. And we mentioned that in many episodes,
yes,
that Islam looks at the personal interest and as an individual interest, and looks at the public interest. But if there's a clash between the two, which one do always come? Will always come before. We always take the public one. And the Sharia also lays down the law that if there is good that we could bring, okay, if there's good that we could bring and a bad that we could prevent, then we must daf' al-madarra مقدم على كسب المنفعة. Okay, to prevent a bad, comes before bringing a good. So the Sharia looks at those principles. These are principles that the scholars had agreed on, they had put them down, derived from the Quran and Sunnah, based on many of the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, such as la darar wa la dirar, do not bring harm to yourself nor the others.
On this very big, important rule, a big guide indeed, and sometimes you feel it is comprehensive.
Yes.
It encompasses. I mean, it's really the guide is no harm should be inflicted, nor shall be transcended. So this big guide, if we apply it really in our lives, we could live a happy life. We could all be good to each other, because after all, the Muslim is the one that's good to his brother, and man salim al-muslimuna لسانه ويده.
من سلم المسلمون
من لسانه ويده.
من سلم المسلمون من لسانه ويده. This is what the Prophet Muhammad
عليه
said.
الصلاة والسلام.
The best of believers are those that the Muslims are free and secure from their tongue, or the harm of their tongue and the harm of their hands. And the Prophet ﷺ said, as we mentioned, la darar, which means do not bring a harm to yourself, nor that you bring harm to others. And Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Do not eat your wealth between you when it comes to evilness or in any form of falsehood. وَلَا تُلْقُوا بَأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, do not put yourself in any harmful or unbeneficial position. These are principles, very clear principles, derived from the Quran and Sunnah. And that not only includes protecting someone's soul, protecting your religion, protecting your soul, protecting your offsprings and honor, protecting your intellect. This is a great ni'mah, the intellect, and protecting your wealth. So these are 5 values. Islam calls upon every individual and the public and the state to protect, put all the means to protect it, and do whatever you can to protect those main 5 values.
Indeed, and one of the great principles would be that the welfare should be out there for all, or we wouldn't have seen zakah as one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So, and we know hadith, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that you're not really a Muslim if your stomach is full and your neighbor is lying there, and you know that he's hungry. So I guess solidarity and the social dimension here of Islamic economics is also a big ruling principle.
Yes. See, this is where you look at Islam as a very comprehensive and a very inclusive religion that includes everyone. Such as the system that Islam had put is a very complete system. So we're talking about the market here, and this is where Islamic economy comes in, where the market about buying and selling, and there's certain restrictions. But not everyone can buy and sell. Not, everyone has the ability or has the potential to buy and sell. So therefore,
or has the means.
Yeah, so those who buy and sell need to give some of their wealth back to the poor. And those poor become rich from the money that they get from the rich people, because if people give their zakat, it will make everyone rich. And that's what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said as one of the signs of the day of one of the signs that will happen during the time of Hatim. One of the companions' name is Hatim bin Adi. He said, if you live longer, you'll find someone carrying a bag of gold trying to give it to someone no one will accept. And that what happened when everyone was paying their zakat. So you find Islam a very comprehensive.
So that means that we're not giving our zakat.
Of course, because the lack of payment of zakat and the lack of sadaqah, the lack of donations that's happening, it's making more people poor, because the poor, some people are poor for various reasons. Some people are ill, they can't earn an income. Some people don't have the qualification. Some people don't have the potentials. So those who have the qualification and potentials need to give some of their wealth to those poor, so they could complete their society and complete the lack within those people. This is what Islam is about. This is one part of it, is the zakat. You've got the other part, which is the sadaqat, the donations that Islam always recommends people to donate, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ continues to recommend people to donate for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla, which helps a lot of people. And then you've got the waqf, the endowment, where people do something for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla, for the sake of the poor or for the sake of the needy. And then you've got other things, such as when there is an Islamic state, and there is a battle between Muslims and their enemies, and the booty they take also, that goes as an income to the soldiers and an income to the government, and many things that perfect a society. This is the beauty of Islam, that Islam is not just focuses on economy and what happens in the market, but it perfects the whole society, and everyone works together within it.
And as we said, that the West might need to learn from Islamic principles, the Islamic theories in the world of economy. Also, the Muslim world here might have to go back to its real principles and think about global things very well advanced in the West, like healthcare, for instance. Because most Muslim nations don't really have a good healthcare system for their citizens. But isn't it, Sheikh, the duty of the state in today's world to look after the welfare of everybody, and that would include having a healthcare system instead of seeing people dying here and there because they don't have enough money to, or not the means to get the good treatment. Isn't that an Islamic principle as well?
Of course, the Islamic State usually has something called Bayt al-Mal. It's what we refer to as the treasury. And the Khalifa he is responsible for the affairs of the Muslims. And the Bayt al-Mal should provide all such services to those people. Provide services to the poor, provide health services, educational services, welfare services. These are all the things that you find the West had adopted, and they're all Islamic. They're all implemented by
even democracy
Khulafa.
Or Shura. Isn't it an Islamic principle?
Yeah, and they were all adopted by.
Right.
They were all adopted from our Islamic Khulafa, our Muslim Khulafa, and great leaders in the past, such as Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. We're talking about 1,400 years ago.
Subhanallah. And why did we forget it today?
Yes.
On this note, we're unfortunately out of time. On behalf of you, we thank very much Sheikh Shady Al-Suleiman from Sydney, Australia, researcher in the field of Islamic economics, and we hope to meet again, Sheikh, in the very near future for the upcoming episodes in our series Islamic Finance, inshallah. Thank you, Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear viewers. Make sure you do stay with Huda TV.